Good morning and welcome to the webinar Hybrid Cloud Strategies for Financial Services. My name is Tom Stack and I'm the Vice President of Sales for Fiorano Software, and I'll be your moderator today. Our panelists today are Jason Bloomberg from Intellyx and Atul Saini from Fiorano Software. Jason is a leading industry analyst and expert in achieving agile digital transformation by architecting business agility in the enterprise. He advises business executives on digital transformation initiatives and trains architecture teams on agile architecture. He has published books such as The Agile Architecture Revolution, Service-Oriented or Be Doomed, How Service Orientation Will Change Your Business, and are highly regarded in the SOA industry. Atul Saini is the Chief Executive Officer of Fiorano and our Chief Technology Officer. Founded in 1995 with the vision of bringing an architectural revolution in the realm of business integration. For over 2 decades now, Atul has been at the forefront of integration in SOA with continuous innovation from the days of basic messaging in the mid-90s to the present-day API management and peer-to-peer distributed processing. Atul is also one of the first entrepreneurs to recognize the power of microservices as a critical architecture decision in redefining today's digital world. I'm going to give it over to Jason. Jason, take it away.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's great to be here. Let's see if I have control here. Looks like I do. So we'll be talking about hybrid cloud strategies for financial services. Let's see, I need to have control here. There we go. Even though this talk is going to be focused on financial services, much of what we'll be talking about, both myself and Atul, apply more broadly to general enterprise situations. So if you're on this webinar and you don't happen to be working for a financial services firm, stick with us. There's plenty of good material here. So just a little about me. Tom mentioned my book, that we've also published our Agile Digital Transformation Roadmap poster, and I'll have the URL for the free download at the end of my talk, so stay tuned for that. Okay, let's get right into it. So when we think about hybrid cloud scenarios, the notion of hybrid cloud generally is connecting connecting something on premises to something in the cloud. But in reality, there's a lot more to it, right? We have one scenario where you have on-premises technology and you're connecting it to infrastructure as a service in the cloud, so your Amazon or Azure account, for example, and now you're managing your own software in the cloud and integrating it somehow with your on-premises gear. But that's not the only scenario, right? You may be using software as a service product like Salesforce or ServiceNow or any number of others and connecting those to your on-premises technology. So that's also a hybrid cloud scenario. Well, the list goes on, right? We could connect our software running in Amazon and Azure to Salesforce or ServiceNow or some other SaaS product, and even though there's no piece of that is on premises, that is still a hybrid scenario. And so you get the idea, right? We could connect ServiceNow to Salesforce, or we could mix and match any of these, including various third parties. And this is one of the scenarios that comes up in financial services in particular, because there are a number of roles for financial services intermediaries, which are themselves enterprises with on-premises technology. And now we have these more complex multi-party hybrid scenarios. So these are just some examples. In reality, we have far more complexity out there. And this is something to keep in mind about what it means to do hybrid cloud in the modern environment. So in terms of your considerations, right, it's not just connecting one thing to another thing. It's not just simple integration, because there's many other things to consider, right? We're in a regulated environment. We're dealing with sensitive information, and we're moving money around. So the hackers are, beating on our doors at every minute. So we have to have appropriate encryption, appropriate authorization and authentication. Of course, there's regulatory compliance, and that's going to be one of the focuses of our conversation. Data governance is very important. That's especially important in areas that have a data governance related regulation like the European Union, but really it applies around the world. And then we have APIs, which is the glue that helps us connect everything. And then in the cloud, we expect resilience, right? We expect the cloud not only to scale elastically, but if there's a problem, we want it to bounce back. Right? We want automated recovery from failure. And now we have to deal with that because we don't want any transient issues to adversely impact customers or, broadly speaking, the end-to-end financial transactions, right? We just can't afford to have a problem, stop a transaction mid-flight, for example. Okay, so in terms of the business context for the financial industry, there are a number of pressures that apply to really any industry today. Competitive pressures, it's a globalized world, so we have global competitive pressures. Cybersecurity risk is something that is now a C-level concern, right? It's not just a technology concern. Some of the breaches that are well publicized adversely impact share price, drive customers away. So it's a business concern now. Regulatory mandates and constraints as well. We'll talk about PSD in particular, which is primarily European, but those mandates and constraints, every jurisdiction around the world has them, and so especially if you're a multinational now, you have to deal with a complex interrelated environment of regulatory mandates and constraints. So the idea of a mandate is that the regulation is telling you have to do something, and a constraint, essentially the regulation is saying, well, there are things you can't do. There's boundaries that you can do business within, but you're not allowed to cross those boundaries. So they're two sides of the same coin. Okay, so PSD2, so what is it? Well, the Payment Services Directive, PSD without the 2, has actually been around for a number of years. So it's broadly implemented now. And if you're working in a financial services firm, you've probably already implemented it. It's probably in place. So it's an EU directive out of the European Union, been around now for almost a decade. And it regulates payment services and providers in Europe. So how, credit card companies deal with transactions, but also PayPal and all of these, newer crop of payment services and providers, the whole ecosystem. And that's in place. What's happening now, though, is we have this next generation of payment mechanisms and third-party providers, Apple Pay and all of the others, that are now requiring the governmental organizations to come up with updated regulation. And that's what PSD2 is, right? So PSD2 is an update to the PSD. It's been in the works now for a few years, but you know how these things go. It takes years to hammer out all the specifics of the regulations, and then it takes years to hammer out all the specifics of how various vendors and then the enterprises themselves will implement the regulations. So it's a work in progress. Just because it's been in the works now for 3 to 4 years doesn't mean it's broadly implemented yet, but it is something that you're required to implement if you're in this industry. So it's not an optional thing. So what PSD2 brings is a better customer protection and security, or consumer protection. Consumer protection is especially important in Europe, but of course it's also important at other locations. The emerging payment methods, mobile phone-based and Internet of Things-based payment methods are a part of this set of regulations. And perhaps most interesting for this conversation, since we're focusing on the integration story, is that PSD2 allows and actually requires direct connection between merchants and banks via APIs. So this is something now that applies to both the merchants and the banks, as well as a set of third parties that we'll talk about as well. Okay, so this direct connection via APIs. Well, what's going on here? Well, generally speaking, in the past, and the present as well, transactions between merchants and their customers have gone through intermediaries, right? So the customer may have a credit card or maybe a debit card, and they're at a retail establishment, and the money goes somehow from either the credit card company to the merchant's bank, or from, if it's a debit card, from the consumer's bank account to the merchant's bank, but there's intermediaries in between that handle all the heavy lifting in between. Well, with PSD2, we're allowing an entirely new integration pattern. Retailers now, with the permission of the consumer, interact directly with the customer's bank. Right, so the merchant talks to the customer's bank and basically says, hey, the customer has told us it's okay to send us money, right? So then the money would go from the customer's bank to the merchant's bank at that point, but the interaction between the merchant and the customer's bank does not need an intermediary anymore. It's all done via APIs. So there's a couple of things to think about here, right? We need permission from the consumer, so we need to get that right? We want to make sure the consumer has the appropriate interface, so the appropriate technology, knows how to use it, and most importantly, we need to make sure that it's difficult to hack into this stuff, right? We don't want any man-in-the-middle attacks, any bad guys spoofing consumers and erroneously giving this permission. So there's a lot raising the bar on security. There are a number of challenges there. And then of course we have to keep in mind that the transactions we're supporting now aren't just presenting a card at a merchant. Now we're presenting the mobile phone at a merchant, or more generally, using our phones to conduct e-commerce transactions, even when we're, in the middle of nowhere, right? Even if we're not at a merchant location. So all of these now have to work at high performance and have to work with a variety of mobile devices, right? So it's not just the fixed credit card reader at the merchant anymore. Now we're using any number of devices from our phones to tablets, and then we may be interacting with machines for anything from soft drink machines to toll booths to parking lot automated machines, and now we want to make payments from our mobile phone to our toll booth without any humans involved, and all of these are part of the scenario, and they have to be real time. They have to be highly performant. Obviously, if you're paying a toll, you don't want to have to slow down and wait for 45 seconds, right? Tolls these days, you don't even have to slow down anymore, right? So this is raising the bar on the performance that at the same time as we're diversifying the types of touch points, and we're running so many of these interactions over the mobile phone networks as well. So in an international context where we have roaming and trade-offs between different phone systems. So there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes that all have to come together to make this work. Okay, so one of the key things to keep in mind is even though PSD2 is an EU set of regulations, it really applies globally because we just don't have the borders that we have just don't constrain us when we deal with commerce scenarios, right? People just travel with their phones and they expect their phones to work wherever they go now, right? It was only maybe 10 years ago, in the US, we'd have to buy a special phone that would work in Europe because our American phones wouldn't work in Europe. Well, now we just expect phones to work everywhere, right? We just think that happens. So if I take my US phone and I go to Europe, I want to be able to make a payment. If I go to Africa, if I go to Asia, I expect it to work, right? So regardless of whether the merchant is European, regardless of whether the banks involved are European, or the phone companies that are involved, right? So even though you're talking about European regulations, these apply globally, right? In the context of all the other regulations and all the other jurisdictions that also have to apply. So one of the key things to keep in mind about regulations is that not only are they arbitrary, right? Governments can just make them up. You can change them as well. So they're always changing. They're always evolving. So from the technology perspective, we can't think in terms of hard-coded functionality. We have to think in terms of dynamic capabilities that can respond to ongoing changes with regulations. And that's now, again, raising the bar on our technology infrastructure, because we can't just say, okay, PSD2, let's implement that and then we're done. No, it's going to continue to evolve, and who knows, PSD3 or whatever might be around the corner. So we have to expect that, plan for it, and be prepared ahead of time to be proactive about these kinds of changes in the regulatory environment. Okay, so a little bit more about how PSD2 works. It introduces some new third parties, right? We don't have the same kind of third parties we had before, right, that actually are in the transaction flow, right? The credit card processor was in the transaction flow between consumer and merchant. Well, these are a different kind of third parties that are now being essentially introduced and then regulated, right? So all the rules about these third parties and what they can and cannot do. So in particular, the third-party payment provider or payment service provider, or TPP is the abbreviation, that's the general category. Under that TPP category, we have payment initiation service providers that are working now with that customer device. The customer device may contact the PISP to initiate service on behalf of a merchant. And then we have account information service providers, or AISPs, whose role is to provide the relevant data about the consumer, about the merchant, about other aspects of the transaction, keeping in mind that information about consumers in particular is especially sensitive, especially in the EU. Right, so you have all the rules about need to know and about right to forget and all these other rules that apply to consumer information. So it's now beholden upon the AISPs to ensure that they're following the appropriate regulations about how to handle this information. On the plus side, if you're a merchant or a bank, you can rely upon AISPs to provide you with just the information that you need when you need it, and that lightens the regulatory load on those more established providers, right? We can now offload some of the regulatory compliance burden onto AISPs, and that's part of the reason why PSD2 calls for that kind of intermediary. So there's new business opportunities. Obviously, if you're a startup in the financial services space, you may want to be a PISP or AISP because there's opportunities there, right? But on the integration side, there's more parties to integrate with. So we have new kinds of parties, new kinds of integration, new regulations, as well as an increasingly complex and burdensome cybersecurity environment, right? The hackers are getting smarter, and we have to get even smarter than the hackers, and that's an ongoing battle. So these transaction processors, of course, are going to be running in the cloud. So any integration with a TPP, whether it's a PISP or AISP, will essentially be a hybrid scenario, right? You're interacting with a cloud-based provider. So let's think of now, within the context of all these new intermediaries and the direct interaction between customers or between merchants and customers' banks, let's take a look at the hybrid cloud context. And you can only put so much of it on a slide before it got too messy. So this is a simplified view. Feel free to take this and add a whole bunch more arrows, because there's plenty more arrows and other third-party providers you could add to this. But this gives you an idea now of what's involved. Every arrow now is essentially some kind of integration or customer interaction. So you see there's a lot of arrows already. So the merchants now may be interacting with the PISPs or AISPs. The merchants now have direct interactions with customer banks. Of course, the merchants are already interacting with their own banks, and the customer banks and the merchant banks are interacting, and that's a more traditional payment clearing, transaction clearing. But we also have merchants. What are merchants doing? Well, they have their websites, and if they're doing e-commerce, then they're doing transactions on their websites. That's now a part of the story. And we have, if the merchants are doing transactions on mobile devices, then there's a mobile backend as well, and that mobile backend, as well as the website, that's not drawn in there, but those now have to interact with the customer's bank as well. So there are many different parties, and keep in mind the website and the mobile backend may be hosted in a cloud or provided by a SaaS provider, right? So it could be IaaS, you could just be running your mobile backend technology in Amazon or Azure, or you could contract with a SaaS-based mobile backend service, and there's plenty of those out there now, and all of those now have to participate in this, revamped regulatory context. So moving right along. That's it from my slides. So there's my contact information. Twitter is the eBiz Wizard. If you want to download our poster, free download. It's agiledigitaltransformation.com. We also have print posters you can purchase if you want, but virtually everybody just downloads the free PDF. So feel free, and there's a lot of detail there. So hope you enjoy it. So now I'm turning it over to Atul. So Atul, you're up next.
Hello, everybody. This is Atul Saini. I'm the president of Fiorano, and I'm going to be talking to you about some of the implementation strategies around hybrid cloud that Jason had explained so well over the last 20 minutes. So, getting on with it, we should. Sorry, trying to get the next slide here, and. Seems to be a little bit of an issue getting to the next slide, which hopefully should soon be resolved. Okay, so here we are. Now, the first thing we talked about was that besides, with the whole digital transformation space exploding, with PSD2 or other regulations or like in any other vertical, the number of transactions is going to go up significantly. So existing resources and any additional resources, speed, besides security, which is obviously very critical, scalability and speed become a very important issue, along with manageability. So the traditional hub and spoke type architecture tends not to scale very well. So one of the keys that we've found has been very useful for customers is a peer-to-peer architecture. So peer-to-peer architectures, what they do is they essentially allow much more scalability and reliability while giving you the manageability of a hub and spoke type architecture. So control can be centralized as it is in a hub and spoke architecture, while you can scale linearly as you get more partners and more customers, or the hybrid cloud scenario, the particular cloud scenario becomes bigger and bigger. You don't have to have any centralized hub becoming a bottleneck. Control messages can still flow through a centralized hub, but those are typically very manageable, and it's the data flow that matters. So here's a good example of a hybrid cloud deployment. You can have an enterprise firewall and the concept of a peer server, which is a server within the enterprise firewall, and then another peer server in a SaaS cloud, another one in a PaaS cloud, and you could have a third or fourth one in different environments. So as you add more environments over your hybrid cloud scenario, over just any cloud scenario, even within the enterprise, you could, excuse me, essentially do all of this without losing any performance. So for instance, in the SaaS cloud, the performance is not affected by the application performance in the PaaS cloud or within the enterprise. And the administrative console, again, it can be within the enterprise, or you could have a separate pair essentially coming up. And so the data flow, the green lines indicate data flow. Processing is done within each separate cloud, and data flows between the clouds, so you can scale very linearly and performance is not affected. And obviously, there's a comprehensive security system that is controlled out of a central location for convenience, but which is also fully distributed. Next slide. So, for instance, you could have the admin console in a totally separate peer system, and this whole peer admin thing that you're seeing could actually be outside. It could be in a different network altogether. So you have the level of flexibility. In a hybrid cloud scenario, you need an architecture that gives you the flexibility to also ensure that the infrastructure itself is distributed. There's no centralized infrastructure. If you're going to have a hybrid cloud, if you're going to have a situation where applications are all in different locations with different clouds or multiple applications, you need to have infrastructure that scales in exactly a similar type of model. So we'll now look at two potential deployment scenarios just as examples. So in the first hybrid cloud deployment scenario, we really have security as the big focus. Next slide, Harshit. Right. So, a classic example of a hybrid cloud scenario is, this is a very simplified view where you've got an on-premises data center, and then you want to basically connect with an outside cloud application just to get some processing done in a very secure way, and then bring the processed data back. So what you would do in this case is all your consumer data is behind the firewall, so it's very secure. And when you want to do some processing, you basically send it outside and gets processed outside. And this again scales very well. If you look at the cloud scenario outside, you could have multiple of these, right? And if you were to send multiple messages out at the same time, they'd be processed in parallel. So you would really scale quite well. So Security is very key over here. This is an example of, there are multiple security standards that are implemented, like OAuth and multiple levels of encryption. So in this situation, you would basically scale in a peer-to-peer manner in a very secure way and keep your consumer data on-site. Then we can look at another different scenario. Then the next scenario. Excuse me. In this situation, let's assume cost becomes an issue in a hybrid cloud scenario as well. You can't really keep expanding your data center and have multiple data centers all the time. So what you could do is essentially, if you have two different locations and you have applications on both sides, local applications, like in the existing diagram you have on the left side, you have an enterprise with enterprise apps behind the firewall, and then you might have a partner location or a different branch of your own company with local consumer data and applications, which are very specific, right? If you're a global business and you've got something in Latin America and Europe and Africa, and your headquarters is in America or vice versa, and any combination of the two, you want to be able to communicate securely and have, a secure message transfer from one location to the other, and then local processing going on. And that, again, along with all the security scenarios, makes sure that you have the ability to get both the security and the performance and scalability that you desire. Now remember, from an admin standpoint, the administration can always be centralized, because even if you have a vast number of clouds that you're talking to, let's say you're talking to 5, 10, 15 clouds, the control information is not very large. Control packets scale very well, so you can have a centralized hub for control. It's the data processing that kills you. If you were to basically just have a centralized processor and the data got to keep going back to one single central location to get processed each time, that would be very, very expensive. And the peer-to-peer architecture really obviates that need. So with this sort of background, these two samples, what we'll do is we'll take a look at PSD2 as an example. So as Jason had explained, PSD2 is a sort of a fully digital way of paying. Ideally speaking, there are no intermediaries involved. In the current scenario today, if you have a merchant like Amazon, just as an example, to shop there, you've got to give them your credit card number, and basically whenever you buy something, your credit card is charged, and so there's a sort of third party and a middleman involved, and there's a sort of commissions that get paid there. With PSD2, essentially, whenever a payment has to be made, you go to Amazon and buy something, and Amazon will directly contact your bank, and you would instead of giving Amazon your credit card, you'd give them an identification along with a long sort of 14 to 20 digit, or depending on the AISP, you'd have a password which encodes your bank information and lots of other details about you. So Amazon sends that credential over to your bank essentially, which is typically both a PISP and an AISP. We'll talk about that in a moment. And you get authenticated. After the authentication happens, that's the first level, that your account information is checked by the bank, and if it's a valid scenario from a merchant, then the bank then sends the end customer directly a one-time generated token to say, is this approved? Let's say you want to charge $50. So you go ahead and charge $50, you say okay, it comes back to your bank, the bank says fine, I'm going to go ahead. And the bank has all the information about the merchant's bank, and goes ahead, executes the wire transfer, and gets the transaction done. And this sort of transaction does not require a credit card company in the middle. Of course, there are lots of other complex issues, like what happens if you want to give the product back, etc., etc. Those are not part of this presentation, but the whole idea is to first understand how the hybrid cloud scenario works over here, and to talk about the importance of the infrastructure and implementing PSD2. So now let's take a look at a little more detail. So the merchant, obviously the banks, for simplification purposes, we'll have to make the assumption, at least for this presentation, that the bank is both the account information services provider. A bank might have millions of clients. So the accounts of those clients are managed by the bank, and the bank finds a way to securely expose this information to validated third parties. So if a merchant contacts the customer bank, right? There you go. That contact happens via HTTP, right? Obviously, the customer bank has to expose its information via APIs. API management integration is a part of this whole scenario, as we've already mentioned. So the first step is the merchant contacts the bank with the credentials it's been given by the end user, and the bank says, okay, this end user is a valid end user. Then there's this whole concept that, okay, I want to charge $50, some amount of money. So the bank then generates a one-time token typically. There are other mechanisms as well. And in a secure, encrypted manner, sends this token to the customer. Typically, the typical transaction is via mobile phone. Right? The customer then has a minute or two, just a specific time window in which to get back to the bank saying, okay, actually, this is a valid transaction that Amazon wants from me. It's not just it's not an invalid transaction. And you get the authentication. And after the authentication is made, the customer bank simply transfers directly to the merchant bank. So now, from the standpoint of an actual implementation, we have to look at this now in terms of the actual cloud infrastructure. And this is a very, very simplified view to start out. So the customer account information, the customer's bank stores the information of the customer, right? It's in the bank's data center. The data center of the bank is in the cloud, in the private cloud. So this information has to be exposed securely to the merchant when the merchant requests it. So the merchant has the credential, the merchant on the left side has the credential, and when they make a request, that information, that request connects with the cloud infrastructure of the customer bank, right? And the merchant gets the information saying, okay, this account is now validated, or in the sense that the customer actually has, I've managed to contact the bank properly. Then the merchant sends another message to the bank for the payment initiation. And the payment initiation happens as follows. The payment initiation part of the bank's infrastructure may be in a separate cloud altogether from the account information, from the AISP portion of it. Right? There's a message that's sent saying, okay, I want to initiate this payment from this customer. The customer bank then says, okay, wait a moment. It goes ahead and decides, okay, I need to first contact the customer to see if this thing is sort of fully valid. Is the customer okay with this? So you have to have full non-repudiation, which means that the customer can not deny that, when the customer gets this token, all of this information has to be recorded. Every transaction has to be recorded in the bank and stored away, and the full transaction details with timing have to be known. The customer gets back to the bank, and the bank says, fine, I'm ready to execute the transaction, and then it executes a fairly complex transaction with the merchant bank to actually wire the money. Now the lines look very simple and straightforward, but each of these red lines, besides just a request, there's in many steps, like for example, in the final step, customer bank to merchant bank, that's not just a simple thing. There's a lot of integration required there, because the data formats of all the electronic information have to be different, transformations have to be applied. So this whole thing is a combination, the PSD2 implementation is a combination of sophisticated API management technology to basically expose the information in a secure, managed, metered, and monitored way, and distributed integration technology to manage all these operations at the rate of, millions and millions of transactions per minute, per hour, sometimes per second. You're talking about a vast number of transactions on a daily basis. So ultimately, it's not just going to be the banks that are going to use PSD2. When you go to a restaurant, the restaurant again uses your credit card, right? Ultimately, imagine if you had a different kind of device or a card, and you just were able, you swiped something at the restaurant and you gave them your credentials. The restaurant would then essentially become the merchant, and the same process would happen directly at the restaurant without a credit card. So the idea is to make things more efficient and also have a full digital record of everything, instantly available to you or to others, including the government. Not always a good thing, but that's sort of the requirement today. So this gives you a general overview of PSD2, and I think at this point we can probably just open it up for some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Jason and Atul, for your very interesting and complete conversation about the opportunity and the challenges going forward with these new technology, the PSD2, and the implementation of those technologies in the marketplace. We're now looking for some questions. Hopefully, you've been able to, if you will, type your questions into the box on the panel on your right, and we will start responding to your questions as soon as we receive them.
Well, Atul, while we're waiting for other questions, I have a question for you. How does Fiorano's peer-to-peer approach, why is that especially useful for these PSD2 scenarios? What is it about Fiorano that makes it appropriate for these kinds of hybrid challenges?
The issue really is the volumes are going to be quite large once PSD2 takes hold, and processing can be distributed very easily with the peer-to-peer architecture. So that is a fundamental point here that makes the architecture much more superior. And even the Fiorano, besides the ESB being peer-to-peer, the API management infrastructure, we have a single management server and multiple gateway servers. So we've mimicked the peer-to-peer architecture for the API management portion as well. So when a bank scales and it's got millions of end users, you will need to distribute the load of these end users with the number of requests coming in, especially in a country, for instance, like in India and China with billions of people. And those countries are moving very, very quickly towards digital technologies and digital payments. Very, very fast indeed. So scaling is going to become a massive challenge for customers, for companies, and we feel the peer-to-peer architecture is very ideally suited to that.
We're still waiting for some questions. We haven't received any. Okay, so we have our first question here from Marcus. And the question is, to what extent is DLT supporting and in parents in the PS2 example shown the Fiorano software? Did you get that, Atul? The question is, to what extent is DLT supporting the Fiorano software?
Right now, as far as the software goes, it's really just pure API management and the underlying infrastructure. So as far as reporting goes, those are things that have to be implemented you know, on an as-required basis by any particular bank. So we're really quite orthogonal to other standards for reporting, put it that way.
I hope, Marcus, that answers your question. At this point, we are not receiving a second question from Sanjeev. What are some of the key challenges in integrating this with existing architectures? Atul and Jason?
Yeah, that's
The question
I mean,
from Sanjeev
yeah,
is, what are some of the key challenges in integrating this with existing architecture?
yeah, that's a good question, and unfortunately, the answer is going to be specific to your existing architecture. But generally speaking, when you say existing architecture, I wrote about this just recently. That might mean, depending upon your situation, an existing SOA deployment on premises, and there's quite a number of those out there where they have been implemented over the last 10 to 15 years, primarily on-premises middleware. And now, of course, the challenge is, well, how does the cloud fit into that if you have existing on-premises middleware? You know, that can be a complex situation in terms of connecting, you know, building hybrid scenarios on top of existing middleware. But generally speaking, though, if you have that existing middleware in place and it's working for you and it's exposing services, we can call those services now enterprise services, and they're a way of streamlining the integration of those enterprise assets into any modern infrastructure. So, for example, if you're at a bank and you're looking at PSD2 and all of these hybrid and you know, hybrid scenarios, PSD2 scenarios, and you have these existing on-premises services, those can now support the ability of integrating on-premises assets into any modern architecture. So I know, Atul, if you have more to add on that.
Yeah, integrating with existing architecture is really a question of the infrastructure itself has to be designed in a scalable way, whereas the point integrations, if you've got 50 points of integration, those are done via adapters. So there is already a very rich set of adapters that comes with the software, so connecting to almost any system is straightforward. When you don't have a direct connector, you can actually custom build one in a variety of languages, Java, C, C++, C#. So integration is really not a problem in talking to any architecture. It's a question of how efficient the existing architecture is and how you can scale from there going forward.
Okay, we've got another question from Annie. How does API handle currency conversions and the commission involved with the other you know, parties?
Those the commissions are really business rules. Those are done. The API management concept is a way of simply exposing the information within the bank to the merchants or third parties in a very secure way. So the full system would basically have separate modules to do the rules management and the commission calculations, etc., etc., etc. So the integration infrastructure and the API management is sort of the core backbone of the solution, but the full PSD2 solution itself requires additional modules to be built on top of this in the form of microservices. So it's very straightforward to do, and almost any scenario for calculation of business rules can be incorporated fairly easily.
I hope that answers your question, Annie.
Yeah, just one thing to add on currency conversion. I mean, because the PSD2 is a set of EU-based regulations, and the EU is primarily the euro, but obviously there's, at least for the time being, the UK is in there, and you have some of the Nordic countries with alternate currencies, and Switzerland as well. Multiple currencies are built into the regulations, right? It's not like it's an add-on. The way you might see with American regulations, where we sort of have this U.S.-centric view of the world, and everybody should be using our dollars. That's not the way it is in Europe. So you expect to find currency conversion issues resolved within the context of the regulations.
So I hope that answers your question, Annie. And we can go into more detail with that if you want to send us any other questions. At this point, the questions seem to be, I think we've answered all of what we've had so far. So there is a survey that we would request that you fill out regarding our presentation today. And in that survey, you can add any additional questions you'd like, and we will answer those questions and get a response to you as quickly as possible. And of course, at any time, you can contact Fiorano Software. Fiorano Software will get back to you to discuss your questions and hopefully provide a solution and an answer for you. We do have one final question that's just come back to us, and that is, do we have any reference sites? And I think Atul, you might want to manage that.
We have reference sites for both API management and for integration. For PSD2, there's a lot of interest, and projects have been planned, but there's nothing in production right now. But it is something that is mandated by the EU specifically, and all banks have to implement it. We expect to be going live with our first set of PSD2 sites by March next year. So implementations are underway.
Thank you. Again, if you have any further questions, you can just send them directly to Fiorano Software or include in the survey that we provided at for the end of the presentation. We appreciate your attendance today. Thank you very much, Atul and Jason, for your discussion. And we look forward to you in our next webinar session. Again, thank you very much, and we look forward to any questions you may have via email or our survey process. Thank you very much, and that ends our session for today.